I think it's fair to say that the Warp Star is Kirby's greatest asset. It's been in the franchise since day one, and while people still talk about and question what the Warp Star even is, there is no denying just how valuable it's been for Kirby. The Warp Star has done some insane things, like the numerous times Kirby's traveled from one planet to another in a matter of seconds, which includes the edge of the universe, and the future, or the times Kirby has used it to fend off some of the most harshest threats in the series, having used it against Dark Mind, the manifestation of bad thoughts, Nova, the clock that grants wishes, and in the anime, NME, the embodiment of nightmares. It should be the perfect ride, but there exists a game where, in spite of all the incredible showings that the Warp Star has, shows itself to be a rather average ride, and that there exist other Warp Star variants with unique abilities and skills to them. And this game is called Kirby Air Ride, a game where half of it is Mario Kart and the other half is the best game to ever exist. Kirby Air Ride introduces us to the Air Ride Machines, the only time an official game ever coined an umbrella term for the Warp Star. The Air Ride Machines are Warp Star variants, or more accurately Warp Star adjacent, as what makes Air Ride's Warp Star stand out from your typical Mario Kart is that while Mario Kart has every vehicle in the game play identically to each other with the only difference being in their stats, Kirby Air Ride's machines all play differently to each other on a fundamental level. There doesn't exist two Air Ride machines that have identical controls. Every Air Ride demands you to approach the game in a different way, and I want to understand these Air Ride machines. How would they work in the context of the Kirby world? How would the Air Ride machines measure up to the Warp Star in the same situations, if that's even what they are meant for to begin with? But how do I do this? I can't exactly work with the raw numbers here. Air Ride isn't known for being balanced. Some vehicles are pretty overtuned and others pretty undertuned. It is very clear that there was an intent to make each of these rides balanced, where you had to do a good amount of managing strengths and weaknesses to better handle Air Ride's levels. But it's fair to say that some of the Air Rides got the short end of the stick and others got a little too much. So I cannot work with the raw numbers here, and as a result, I can't work with the more hidden mechanics of the game. Not to mention Kirby Air Riders, the sequel to the game, is coming out pretty soon, and they might retune these machines to a more fair amount. So instead of going for raw numbers, why not go for raw feel? What does it feel like to play this specific Air Ride machine? And how can I translate the game feel into something competitive against the Warp Star? If every star has a unique playstyle, let me understand what that uniqueness is and work with it. That way I can come to a more solid conclusion. This means that while I can't work with the raw numbers as it is, I can work with how these numbers display an advantage or disadvantage. So an Air Ride machine being faster than the Warp Star will be considered, but by how much? Not really. Disclaimer before I start this video, I'm pretty certain Kirby Air Ride and Kirby Air Riders are not canon games. Sakurai seems to hint at this in the direct, so see this video not as me trying to fill in some gaps in the Kirby world, but much rather just me having fun. I personally would love to see these machines become series staples, but I'm pretty certain of how unlikely they're going to appear. I also will only talk about the gameplay aspects of Kirby Air Ride with each star that edits those particular assets. So, editor Flaky here. This script was made before the second Kirby Air Riders direct, which conveniently included a story mode and proper lore on what the Warp Star and its fellow Air Ride machines are. I don't know what to make of this. So let's start with the Slick Star. The Slick Star is what I'm going to classify as a charge type Air Ride machine. In the game, the machines can do something called charging, where Kirby makes the Warp Star build up energy to burst forward in speed. This mechanic is the bread and butter of Kirby Air Ride, as the charge also doubles as your drift. The game loop of Air Ride is hence all about knowing when to do your normal turns and when you need to use charge for those high risk, high reward speed ups. So when I classify something as a charge type Air Ride machine, I mean the fundamental gimmick of the Air Ride is that they change how the charge itself works. If you've been seeing my Warp Star footage, you see that Kirby always slows down whenever he does his charge drift. This slowdown makes it easier to do the tighter turns this game makes you do. The Slick Star's main difference is that it doesn't slow down. The Slick Star will keep moving during charge, making it feel rather slippery in its movements, hence the term. This applies to its regular turning too. It's really entertaining to watch. I am looking the other way. With that being said, how do we take this charge aspect of Kirby's Air Ride and incorporate it into a layer of understanding how the Warp Star moves? Some salient things to consider: the charge drifting mechanic is very likely just something we cannot translate to how the Warp Star moves. Cause simply, the Warp Star is already pretty solid at doing these turns to begin with, which means the charge in and of itself can only be treated as is, a charge. The Warp Star can have an ability to store up energy to burst forward in high speed, which means for the Slick Star, we have to approach it purely by its game feel feel. Playing with the Slick Star feels like playing with a slingshot. You're constantly zigzagging around to get good positioning. This zigzagging motion can very easily be translated to the Warp Star. Since it takes more time to do turns, Slick Star speed is meant to move in a zigzag. Every turn with a Slick Star hence should be predetermined because it's not an instant zigzag. Kirby needs to know ahead of time the kind of motions he needs to do. That means for transportation context, Slick Star can be seen as the superior of the two. Its faster speed and inability to slow down technically gives it a higher travel potential and more quickness in going from one point in space to another. That should however also keep in mind that in more denser settings, Warp Star has natural advantage with its easier control. In a combat scenario, it's going to be generally harder for the Slick Star. Kirby needs to move preemptively with this ride, which means while it can be good in dogfight contexts where Slick Star has to face an airborne machine, in more bullet hell scenarios where Kirby has to dodge a foray of attacks, it's gonna be easier for a more reaction-based vehicle like the Warp Star to handle compared to the Slick Star, which leads to an inherent risk-reward system on both accounts. On pure transportation, if you can handle its need to plan out moves, the Slick Star rewards you with better speed. On pure combat, if you can predict your opponent well enough and predetermine your tracks, the Slick Star is better at closing that distance, but it will have a more difficult time, and both cases have scenarios where it can be overwhelmed rather easily, even with the perfect control and understanding of both the vehicles in the situation. Slick Star logically feels more like a different approach of the Warp Star, rather than a Warp Star that has designated itself to a different role. This is also further implied by copy abilities, as the Slick Star definitely has different preferences on what copy abilities it would prefer over Warp Star. Warp Star, even with its jack-of-all-trades nature, it does really well with Kirby's best. Sword, Fighter, Hammer, they can cooperate really well with the Warp Star because the Warp Star has inherently less defensive risk than the Slick Star does. So for something like Slick Star, either more range-based copy abilities like Fire Kirby or more defensive copy abilities like Bell are going to be more preferable, as they can better circumvent Slick Star's fallings in closing distance, either making it easier or making it less necessary. I would say that even though it is very much balanced like the Warp Star, it does have a leading preference towards traversal as a result. But as stated before, there are rather clear advantages and disadvantages to both. So while I do think there was a traversal inclination with the design of this ride, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's better than Warp Star at traversal. It would depend on the situation. The Jet Star will be classified as a glide type vehicle, as once again it affects that specific stat in Kirby. Glide in Kirby Air Ride is a machine's ability to stay in the air for an extended period of time before eventually needing to land. Glide had me stumped for a while. Having a state that's about how long he could fly against machines that should be able to infinitely fly threw me off on how I could translate this to another way. Something that I will mention is that the glide stat in Kirby is not a speed stat. In fact, the game makes it pretty clear that there's no such thing as air speed and ground speed in the game. The Air Ride machines are never grounded to begin with. The glide is exclusively a stat that controls your level of elevation in the air, whether you can tilt it up to go higher or tilt it down to go lower. So in figuring out how to interpret this, I decided that the glide stat can be seen as something of a vertical handling stat, where while Kirby has a normal handling stat that controls how well he can do turns, he has a vertical handling that is a glide stat that controls how effectively he can move up and down. So how does the Jet Star play with this mechanic? Well, Jet Star always gets a massive burst in speed whenever it starts gliding, before returning to a more normal speed. This massive burst makes Jet Star outstandingly fast in areas where there's a lot of opportunities to start a glide. That also makes it unironically harder to figure out how to incorporate this into lore. The game feels that Jet Star is constantly shifting from going to the air and going to the ground so that you can give yourself more opportunities to get that burst in speed. It is a constant up and down motion. Jet Star also has good regular handling on top of its glide handling, so how do you even incorporate these types of speed boosts in a space setting where there's no floor to glide on? Well, if we are to presume that the Jet Star takes inspiration from Jet Kirby, a copy ability that does quick and short burst movements for dodging and damage, maybe we can presume that the Jet Star actually has a designated design philosophy, and that is meant to be for combat scenarios. Unlike Slick Star, where in a combat scenario it needs to do its actions ahead of time, Jet Star's gliding abilities, which are relatively on par with Warp Star, and superior handling abilities makes it better at evasion than the regular Warp Star. So we add a unique risk and reward system here, where every successful evasion is an instant burst in speed. Then the Jet Star's ability to close space will be absolutely uncontested, and the Jet Star needs to do this in order to get burst of speed, as unlike Slick and Warp Star, it's not as good at charging and bursting forward, which de-incentivizes using it for traversal purposes, as from a general point A to point B setup, is going to struggle to reach that speed it has unless maybe in a denser area where it can evade obstacles. And for anyone wondering, the Slick Star does have an admittedly better glide stat than Warp Star and Jet Star, and with Jet Star being incredibly exceptional at closing space, copy abilities that are exclusively close range work exceptionally well with Jet Star. Jet Star is our first specialized vehicle, with it very much meant for a more combat-centric purpose. The Wagon Star is another charge type vehicle in that it doesn't have it. Wagon Star's whole thing is that it does not charge, but to compensate for this, it has good speed and good handling. It also has more HP than the previous stars mentioned. Playing the Wagon Star feels like you're playing a more bare-bone versions of Kirby Air Ride. All you have to do with the Wagon Star is just do your turns as per normal, since you don't have a charge drift to handle the more steeper turns. It's a far more simpler way to play the game. It's almost like you're putting the thing on training wheels, so why not make it work exactly like that? The Wagon Star is not a Warp Star designed for transportation, combat, or a balance in between. The Wagon Star is the Warp Star on its training wheels, given to those who want to practice how to use the machines before they actually start using those machines. There's more evidence than just game feel for this. While the Wagon Star is just about getting your turns right, it's also known for having a really poor glide stat, which means it's deliberately designed to teach you how to turn with this thing. And as stated before, it has a higher HP stat, which would make sense for a training vehicle since you're very likely going to crash into stuff using it. While in practical use it's probably more balanced, it definitely doesn't prioritize traversal or combat modes. So instead of putting the Wagon Star in the balanced section, it'll be placed in a unique section that I'm going to call the utility section, where its purpose is not actually meant for the same exact purposes as the Warp Star. That being said, I did say in practical use that this air ride would technically be balanced. So what copy abilities would be effective with this particular ride? I would say that due to its naturally higher HP stat, you're actually de-incentivized from using more defensive copy abilities. Sure, it cannot go up and down nearly as effectively as the previously mentioned air ride machines, but still has solid handling and, unlike the other stats, a better margin of error. To me, Wagon as a result would do better with more ranged abilities. It wants to keep its distance and use copy abilities like beam or bomb to handle things. The defensive nature of the copy ability definitely makes it a machine that doesn't really want to close distance. In traversal, it will find its fair use with its higher speed stat even with the extra HP. While the Wagon Star can be feasibly used as a replacement for Warp Star in its settings, I am personally willing to say that if it was to be in the mainline games, that this use wouldn't be what it was meant for. I will say, I personally think the Wagon Star is another one of those vehicles that are just a bit overtuned, just a tiny bit. I often find that the Wagon Star just generally has an easier time with its higher speed. But as stated, we aren't going to consider its raw numbers. Swerve Star is another charge type vehicle. A good amount of the vehicles in Air Ride are gonna be charge types. As the main mechanic of the game, it makes sense that that would be the mechanic that's messed around with the most. Swerve Star's whole charge gimmick is that whenever it uses charge, it completely has to stop. It will not move anywhere. And this is done because that's the only way you can turn this thing. This is how bad his regular handling is. I'm not trying to go straight right now. Swerve Star makes up for its lack of turning and requiring charge to turn by having an incredibly high speed stat. In fact, especially in the race mode, it's one of the most overtuned air rides in the game. It is so overtuned that the actual real competitive racing scene for this game has completely banned Swerve Star from use in the race mode. It's just that fast. I have to presume that the gimmick and feel of the Swerve Star is that even though you can go so fast, you'll find yourself stopping a lot to pull off the turns, which gives the other air ride machines time to catch up. The problem with that is the charge time that the Swerve Star has is one of the best in the game. It reaches its maximum burst really fast. If this was slower to actually give more risk to doing the turns, then it probably wouldn't be so good in this game. But given that its mechanic is that it goes so fast and it has to abruptly stop to do a turn, Swerve Star is 100% meant for traversal. It logically will not have good combat use. Being forced to be sitting duck, even if it is for a second, can be all this air ride needs to completely wreck itself. This is even further implied by the fact that a Swerve Star has one of the lowest HPs in the game. In fact, it's the lowest possible HP value in this game mode. This particular air ride does not have lasting power in a combat scenario. Using it in one will almost necessitate having defensive copy abilities like Bell or especially Mirror to be able to better handle these kind of situations. So similar to the Jet Star, it solidly is a specialized vehicle, where if the Jet Star is meant for combat, the Swerve Star is meant for traversal. While it can be used in combat given the right setup, it's definitely not where it shines the most. Swerve Star is almost exclusively from traveling from one point to another. One can even say that it's min-max in that particular area. The Shadow Star falls under a new classification that I'm going to call offensive type vehicles, and it's the only one in this video that holds this slot. If you guys haven't noticed, I mentioned that the air rides in this game have an HP stat, aka a health bar, and a mechanic of Kirby's Air Ride race mode that you can manually add is the ability to damage this health bar, and when this health bar reaches 0, you just lose. The Shadow Star is almost exclusively designed to take advantage of this mechanic. For an unexplained reason, the Shadow Star's offense stat does not just make the star itself stronger at damaging, it also increases the power of your copy abilities, making them stronger too. When it comes to the Shadow Star, its game plan is almost certainly not to win by getting first place. Shadow Star is designed to destroy the other vehicles in the game by any means necessary. The game feel of the vehicle is to blaze ahead in high speed, right behind your opponents and then instantly damage them, almost like a sneak attack, which is very fitting, but this high speed stat and high damage stat does come with its own price. It shares its HP weakness with the Swerve Star, also sporting the lowest HP in the game. This is its risk and reward factor. The Shadow Star can melt the HP of any Warp Star, but it's just as susceptible to being melted himself. Shadow Star, as obvious as it is a risk-reward specialized vehicle that falls under combat. Similar to Jet Star, it can close distance really well, and with its more sneak attack nature, its gimmick is trying to find a good opening where it can lay its sights on you and swoop in really fast for a clean finish. As a result of Shadow Star's abilities to make attacks stronger, it is synergistic with basically every single copy ability, as it can make any set one stronger. I do think the best synergy is a more defensive one to better handle its low HP, but the Shadow Star unironically has good handling stats, comparable to the Jet Star even, so it has a better time evading to begin with. The Shadow Star hence just makes the most sense as a really risky but really powerful specialized air ride. Unlike Jet Star, it has to gamble more to close the distance, but also unlike it, if it can gamble the distance, the reward for it is incredible. The Wing Star is another glide type vehicle, like the Jet Star. The Wing Star doesn't have a real gimmick like the other Warp Stars we talked about in this video. Much rather, the Wing Star has the best glide stat in this game mode. It soars through the sky like nobody's business. So we have an air ride machine that has the best vertical handling in the entire game. The game feel of the Wing Star is to usually put yourself in glide often to reach certain shortcuts in the area easily, or soar over sections that usually require slowing down to handle. You are always expected to fly with the Wing Star. That being said, it is definitely undertuned. The Wing Star has the second lowest HP value in this game mode, and as if that was enough, it has the lowest defense out of any other ride in this game. It's also the lightest Warp Star in the game, which is a bad thing in this game because that means Wing Star gets flung around really easily. On a game design aspect, I get it. It's supposed to be a lightweight machine to pull off its higher glides, but they made it incredibly fragile as a result. You may ask, why was the Wing Star designed this way? And the answer for that, while simple, did mess it up, and it's because of the other mode of Kirby Air Ride, City Trial. See, the entire idea of the City Trial is to explore the area to get different boosts in your stats while other Kirbys on the map do the same. This means that vehicles with good glide like the Wing Star become really strong on City Trial because they can explore literally everywhere in the map. So these nerfs make sense. You would not want someone to be able to take advantage of this and get the best stuff. It's foresight on the developer's side. Unfortunately, it also led to it being one of the weaker vehicles in the game. So how do we make this work then? If its entire thing is that it does vertical handling really well, but it's weaker everywhere else, then is it for traversal or for combat? Because it doesn't seem like it can do either well. It can't do combat because it has no offense, and it can't do travel because of its lower travel speed. I did say I wasn't going to consider the raw numbers, but if the raw gameplay is failing it too, how about we associate it with another copy ability that does what Wing Star does? Wing Kirby, which I'm pretty certain is the inspiration for this vehicle, as its performance is not that different from Wing Kirby in the same game, so it shares something in common with the Jet Star. Wing Kirby is not just really good at flying or well vertical movement, it's an incredibly fast copy ability. And while it's definitely not noted for having the best damage out there, it's definitely noted for being one of the best abilities to traverse with in the series due to its high speed and great vertical movement. So we can probably put the Wing Star in this same boat. Simply make the Wing Star faster and let it keep its more lower defense and offense capabilities, hence making it another vehicle that's designed for traversal. It's got good speed and it's able to make up and down motion smoothly without any issues, so it can go from point A to point B easily, but struggles in combat as it is weaker in those aspects. That being said though, with this setup, it has an easier time being evasive, so it might be better with longer range copy abilities like the Wagon Star, except it's keeping its distance due to its weaker stats and circumventing with evasion and range, rather than it just generally being tanky. That being said, you can see it as a utility vehicle instead, where its main role is to be a Warp Star that teaches you about vertical handling, since the Wagon Star is pretty weak at that. There is proof in the game feel as Wing Star tends to end up skipping a lot of level design due to how good it is at gliding, so it does simplify gameplay in its own little way. The Bulk Star, another charge type vehicle and the second last charge type for this video. The Bulk Star, instead of having its charge store up energy to give Kirby a boost of speed, the charge is instead used to generate fuel for the Bulk Star, and progressively spends the fuel and runs out, requiring you to charge up the Bulk Star again to get it moving. It's very tedious, but does try to balance it out by having the highest speed stat in the game, and I mean the absolute highest. Hence, the game feel of the Bulk Star is being able to find the correct opportunities to get yourself to high speed and find the right moments to charge drift, regain your fuel, and continue to get yourself to high speed. Given the more industrial design of the Bulk Star and the fact that it uses charge as fuel, I'm going to take the Bulk Star as a utility specialization rather than traversal, combat, or balance. Because in genuine honesty, it's not good anywhere, and everyone who has played Kirby Air Ride would know exactly why. While I do have footage on having gotten first place with the Bulk Star is by far the most undertuned ride in the entire game. It has nothing to do with its stats, it's entirely because of the game feel. It is unnecessary unnecessarily difficult to do fuel management while also making sure you're moving fast enough to get a lead on things. In spite of having the highest speed set in the game, it does not mean much. The bulk star simply just runs out of fuel the moment it reaches top speed, and you are stuck charging for a rather long time before you can actually move again, and you take a while to get to that speed as well. You can imagine why this would be bad in either context, right? You are a sitting duck very often, which makes it really bad at combat, and you don't really get much benefit from its high speed because of the fuel, so it just isn't worth it to use for traversal. But given the entire industrial nature of the copy ability, I consider the bulk star more like a prototype design of an air ride machine. Considering the bulk star is a worse version of the Hydra, a legendary machine that isn't accessible in the main race mode, one can rather interpret the bulk star as a prototype or a concept to the Hydra, maybe even the Warp Star, a primitive design for the express purpose of figuring out how warp stars can be made or designed. Its high speed comes as an after effect of the fuel-based system, but on its own it just cannot be practical. The bulk star is entirely just there for better understanding of the Warp Star and its more advanced nature. I genuinely couldn't think of a better answer here, it's just that undertuned. The Rocket Star is the final charge type vehicle in this game mode. Its gimmick is similar to the Wing Star in that it's the best at its stats. The Rocket Star has the best charge stat in the game. It gets the biggest boost of speed out of every other ride in the game, and the goal with the Rocket Star is to be able to maintain the speed for long enough until it's time to do tighter turns and regain the lost speed. Even though in concept the Rocket Star would be a fantastic travel tool by this simple logic, I think the Rocket Star can be just as good at combat too. The Rocket Star unironically has a really solid glide and handling stat too, which means evasively it's good, and on top of that, it has better HP than most rides, so almost intentionally, while it needs to deal with longer charges, unlike the other machines, it can take the hits it would have to deal with while charging up. It's unironically really good at closing the distance as a result of this. Rocket Star is similar to the Jet Star, would as a result benefit incredibly well with close quarter abilities. In fact, I would even say Rocket Star is better at combat than it is at traversal, as in game, there's a lot of ways for Rocket Star to lose its speed and go back to its lower speed stat, so that kind of means it would prefer combat to take advantage of its burst of speed. Inherently, both are more risky but have better rewards. It's a tricky one to work with, so I won't actually consider this a specialized vehicle. It'll be placed in balance though, if you had my opinion. It is definitely leaning towards combat more. Even in-game, the Rocket Star, in spite of its speed, does hold relative struggle keeping up with the air rides even with the burst speed. Now you may have noticed I decided to leave two of them for last, and that's because I've decided to group these two together, the Formula Star and the Turbo Star. Air ride machines are 100% designed for utility. These Warp Stars are speed type machines. Their gimmick is that they are fast, but they have poor handling as a result. The Formula Star especially can hit some insane speeds if left alone for a while. In a straight line, it beats literally every other air ride machine, with the only one being able to keep up being the Bulk Star without fuel problems and a sneaking Shadow Star. These two Warp Stars are utility because it's abundantly clear that they are both designed for races. It's not meant for combat and not meant for traversal. They're exclusively meant for racing. Their entire gimmick is taking advantage of their speed and maintaining it as long as possible, but in spite of this, they struggle with turning that the Warp Star deals with on average. It's specifically meant for racetracks that don't give themselves intense turns. This is shown in their game design philosophy. Formula Star is literally called Formula Star because of formula racing, and Turbo Star has bad normal handling but absolutely nuts drifting. It can turn corners like nobody's business, as if it's meant to race. These machines can't even glide. They have the lowest glide stats in the game, near zero. They're meant to stay on the ground and glide across whatever track they're dealing with. These two stars are entirely meant to be for racing. It's even shown their HP stat. Formula Star also has the lowest HP value in the game, and Turbo holds basically the second lowest one. With no glide potential, low HP, and really high speeds, it's almost like these Warp Stars were designed to be used for racing and only racing. With everything explained, is there a singular Warp Star that is a better replacement for Kirby? Honestly, no. While all of these have their own advantages and disadvantages, creating its own sense of balance for Kirby to use, the all-purpose nature of the Warp Star makes it generally just the most reliable one. Sure, the Jet Star can be better in combat, but it can't travel as well. And sure, the Rocket Star could do both, but it's riskier and very likely to take hits. The regular Warp Star does everything good, not just one thing amazingly and everything else bad. It makes it the most versatile and the most capable. This doesn't even get into the fact that it has other abilities. It's able to shoot projectiles, or its Starship transformation, which technically counts as a legendary form. There is no real such thing as a better Warp Star, and honestly, not even such a thing as a worse Warp Star. All of these have their places, their uses. I came into this video expecting for every Air Ride machine to share the same purpose, but by different means. But in my time playing Kirby Air Ride, I found myself realizing how vibrant the world of Warp Stars could actually be. Not every Warp Star needs to be to help Kirby out in his adventures. Maybe some Warp Stars are built for a unique purpose of their own. There's a special world building that exists within this game. I was actually really impressed with how many of these machines and their stats actually define what it was meant to do and for what purpose it was made for. In that way, I look forward to Kirby Air Riders and its other Air Ride machines it's going to introduce, and see how they could add to the world. Maybe make a follow-up video about it too. But until then, maybe you should subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys with the next Mario video.